Hi everyone, it's Mr. Wyman, and I am going to share with you an article I found social distancing to stay safe, just like we practiced in the recent past. So, despite how here's like it's called in brief, but it's really a summary of the article. Despite how unnatural social distancing, which means staying um, away from one another, right? And during the pandemic, it was important for us to stay 6 feet away. That was the distance that was scientists found would keep us the safest, while still being able to be around one another. We had to be at least 6 feet away. So, despite how unnatural social distancing may feel to people, it is very much a part of the natural world practiced by mammals, fishes, insects, and birds. Social animals stay apart, changing behaviors such as grooming to stop the spread of diseases that could kill them. Strategies vary from shunning a sick animal to maintaining interactions with only the closest relatives. Shunning would be a good Boulder Dash word. It means making it so that a person or a being within your group, your social group, is cast out or not allowed to be around others. That's what shunning means. On a shallow reef in the Florida Keys, a young Caribbean spiny lobster returns from a night of foraging for tasty mollusks and enters its narrow den. Lobsters usually share these rocky crevices, and tonight a new one has wandered in. Something about the newcomer is not right, though. Chemicals in its urine smell different. These substances are produced when a lobster is infected with a contagious virus called, now I won't be able to say this correctly probably, Panulirus argus, virus 1. And the healthy returning lobster seems alarmed. As hard as it is to find a den like this one, protected from predators, the young animal backs out into open waters and away from the deadly virus. Notice it says away from the deadly virus, not away from the infected lobster. If the lobster wasn't infected, then this spiny, what's it called, Caribbean spiny lobster would be perfectly happy with sharing its den uh, with another. And there are some vocabulary words in here that you may not know. After a night of foraging, foraging means looking around for food. Tasty mollusks. So, what do you think mollusks might be? Well, type of food that the spiny lobster would eat, right? Um, the oops, the lobster's response to disease, seen in both field and laboratory experiments, is one we have become all too familiar with this year: social distancing. People, this was written in 2020, which was the beginning of COVID-19, the pandemic, when we had to wear masks and social distance and all that to protect ourselves from that virus. People's close interactions with family and friends have been cut off to reduce the spread of COVID-19. It has been extremely hard, and many have questioned the necessity. Yet, despite how unnatural it may feel to us, social distancing is very much a part of the natural world. In addition to lobsters, animals as diverse as monkeys, fishes, insects, and birds detect and distance themselves from sick members of their species. Um, I liked one of the vocabulary words in here. Diverse, no. Um, oh well. Anyways, this article is pointing out that all kinds of animals, in addition to humans, find it natural to distance themselves in order to stay safe and healthy. This kind of behavior is common because it helps social animals survive. Although living in groups makes it easier for animals to capture prey, stay warm, and avoid predators, it also leads to outbreaks of contagious diseases. Just ask any human parent with a child in daycare. um, because we get colds all the time from the germs spread around. This heightened risk has favored the evolution of behaviors that help animals avoid infection. Animals that social distance during an outbreak are the ones most likely to stay alive. That, in turn, increases their chances to produce offspring that also practice social distancing when confronted with disease. These actions are what disease ecologists, such as ourselves, term behavioral immunity. Wild animals do not have vaccines, but they can prevent disease by how they live and act. It's really interesting. Immunity through behavior does come with costs, though. Social distancing from other members of your species, even temporarily, means missing out on the numerous benefits that favor social living in the first place. For this reason, researchers have learned that complete shunning is just one approach animals take. Some social species stay together when members are infected, but change certain grooming interactions. For example, whereas others, such as ants, limit encounters between individuals that play particular roles in the colony, all to lower the risk of infection. Worth the sacrifice. Sacrifice meaning giving up something. The ability of spiny lobsters to detect and avoid infected group mates has been key to their persistence in the face of that virus that I tried saying earlier, which kills more than half of the juvenile, which would be like teenage, lobsters it infects. Young lobsters are easy pickings for the virus because the animals are so social. At times, denning in groups of up to 20, safe homes in sponges, corals, rocky crevices along the ocean floor, and a mass of snapping claws help the group of creatures defend against hungry predators such as triggerfish. Nevertheless, in the early 2000s, researcher Don Berenger of the University of Florida and his colleagues noticed that some young lobsters were denning solo, even though it left them vulnerable. Most of these lonely lobsters, the researchers found, were infected with the contagious virus. So probably no one wanted to hang out with them. These lobsters did not choose to den alone, the scientists suspected. They were being shunned. To confirm their hunch, the investigators placed several lobsters in aquarium tanks, allowing healthy crustaceans to choose an empty artificial den or one occupied by either a healthy or diseased compatriot. In a 2006 article in Nature, the scientists reported that when disease was absent, healthy lobsters preferred being social and choose dens with healthy lobsters over empty ones. And lobsters strongly avoided the dens containing virus infected lobsters, even though it meant they had to go it alone. This is our interesting experiment that scientists did. In a follow up study published in 2013 in Marine Ecology Progress Series, so these are the names of the journals, they're in italics here. Berenger and his colleague Joshua Anderson showed that healthy lobsters spot afflicted ones by using a sniff test. It turns out that infected lobsters have chemicals in their urine that serve as a danger signal to healthy group mates. When scientists used crazy glue to block the urine releasing organs of infected lobsters, healthy animals no longer avoided the sick ones. The healthy ones couldn't smell the chemicals of the disease, the virus. When lobsters detect an afflicted animal, afflicted meaning sick, They are willing to take considerable risks to stay disease-free. When Mark Butler of Old Dominion University and his colleagues tethered, which means tied, a sick lobster to the home den of healthy lobsters in the Florida Keys, they saw that healthy animals often abandoned safe havens for open waters, where they were at much higher risk of getting eaten. Now, these are animals that they don't watch the news, they don't know what's going on. They just naturally sense or smell this chemical that the sick lobsters have, and they get out of there because their instinct, which is a word we've been talking about or mentioned in class, tells them this is harmful and they need to jet. When Butler's team repeated the experiment with a tethered healthy lobster, there was no mass exodus. Exodus meaning everyone exiting, getting out of there. In their research, published in 2015 in PLOS One, a journal, online journal probably, scientific journal, the scientists used mathematical models to show that avoidance, while not without costs, prevents viral outbreaks that would otherwise devastate lobster populations. In other words, it definitely is costly to leave a safe den and go into open waters because that triggerfish, the predator of spiny lobsters, could eat them. But it's worse to definitely get a virus that could kill you because half of juveniles die from it, right? So they take that risk. Lobsters protect the valuable and vulnerable. Lobsters are far from the only animals that have found the benefits of social distancing sometimes outweigh the costs. Some other creatures, in fact, have developed ways to boost the payoff by practicing social distancing strategically in ways that protect the most valuable or vulnerable in their group. The most impressive examples occur in social insects, where different members of a colony have distinct roles that affect the colony's survival. In work led by Nathalie Stroy, I'm not going to say that correctly, of the University of Bristol in England, and published in 2018 in the journal Science, researchers used tiny digital tags to track the movements of common garden ant colonies during an outbreak of lethal fungus. Lethal is a great word for Boulder Dash, but it means to kill, all right, deadly. Metarhizium bruneum, the spores of this fungus are passed from ant to ant through physical contact. It takes 1 to 2 days for the spores to penetrate the ant's body and cause sickness, which is often fatal, deadly. The delay between exposure and sickness allowed Stroyamete and her colleagues to see whether ants changed their social behaviors in 24 hours after they first detected fungal spores in their colony, but before fungus-exposed ants showed signs of sickness. So they had it, but weren't telling one another, like giving off signs of it. To measure how ants respond when disease first invades their colony, the researchers applied fungal spores directly to a subject of the forager ants that regularly leave the colony. The foragers are most likely to inadvertently encounter fungal spores while out searching for food. So this approach mimicked the natural way this fungus would be introduced. The behavioral responses of ants in 11 fungus-treated colonies were then compared with the same number of control colonies where foragers were dabbed with a harmless sterile solution. Sterile meaning not infected. Ants in fungus-exposed colonies started rapid and strategic social distancing after treatment. Within 24 hours, those forager ants self-isolated by spending more time away from the colony compared with control-treated foragers. So they have to do controls so that they know that the ants can actually detect the fungus on them. They like dab something that's not the fungus on some ants and then the fungus on others and see if there's a difference. And it's not just because something was added to the one. Healthy ants in fungus-treated colonies also strongly reduced their social interactions, but the way they did so depended on their roles. Uninfected foragers, which interact frequently with other foragers that might carry disease, kept their distance from the colony when disease was present. This prevents them from inadvertently putting the reproductively valuable colony members, the queen and nurses that care for the brood, at risk. The nurses also took action, moving the brood farther inside the nest and away from the foragers once the fungus was detected in the colony. The cues that the ants use to detect the rapidly respond to fungus exposure are still unknown. But this strategic social distancing was so effective that all queens and most nurses from the study colonies were still alive at the end of the experimental outbreaks. Hmm. Garden ants protect the most valuable members of their colony, but some birds use a different strategy, perhaps guided by the strength of their own immune responses and resistance to infection. Maxine Silberberg and her colleagues placed house finches in 3 adjacent cages. Each central bird was flanked on one side by a healthy finch and on the other side by a finch that appeared sick. It got an infection that made it act lethargic. Lethargic, that's another good word. It means like sleepy. By observing the amount of time that the central bird spent on each side of its cage, the researchers showed that finches generally avoid birds that appear sick, but the degree of avoidance varied with the power of their own immune systems. Oh, that's interesting. Birds with higher bloodstream levels of antibodies and of one other protein that may signal broader immune activation showed less aversion. Aversion means like wanting to stay away from anything unattractive. But birds, which would be like staying away from a sick bird, but birds with weaker levels of immunity avoided sick birds most strongly, the investigators reported in Biology Letters in 2013. So, if a finch, the bird in the middle cage, was very healthy and strong and could put up with um, a bird that has like a cold, it would be less likely to avoid that bird that has the cold on the one side. But if a bird in the middle cage isn't super healthy, maybe they just got over a cold themselves, theoretically, they would stay over on the side of the healthy finch and avoid that finch, the bird that is sick. That's what this study was showing. A similar pattern was detected in guppies. Guppies are a type of fish affected by a contagious and debilitating worm called, I'm not even going to try. In work published in 2019 in Biology Letters, Jessica Stevenson of the University of Pittsburgh placed individual guppies. I want to stop right here because, first of all, this is just so long. You can read the rest of this article if you want on your own, but I want to point out the dates. It's very important that they publish the dates because this tells you it was recent, the studies. This particular article was written in 2020, back when the pandemic had just begun and there were no vaccines at all. Social distancing was our best weapon against this virus that we're still dealing with today. Also, cleaning, so using cleansers to clean off germs that would infect people. But this article was fascinating to show how social distancing isn't just something humans do, but animals in nature do just naturally by instinct when they sense something gone awry. And then finally, I mentioned the dates, but I want to reiterate the idea that studies in science change and information is always getting better and better, and we're learning more and more. So it's important to use studies that are the most recent in order to have the best and most up to date information.